If you've ever spent weeks or months trying to learn and master a new concept in Spanish, only to, when you go to use it in conversation or use it in any practical way, completely blank on how to use it or get it completely wrong. If that's ever happened to you, in this video, I'm going to try to explain why that happens and what you can do about it. This is an important concept to consider because it is the core behind questions like, why can't I think in Spanish? Or why can't I remember all these rules that I've been learning? Or why is it that when I go to try to use my Spanish, all my knowledge seems to go out the window and I go blank? Why is it that those things happen? And the reason is, in my experience, that fluency is an automatic process. Just comes out. Thinking about the way that we are speaking, considering whether or not what we're saying is correct, that's a logic-based process. The two basically exist in separate worlds. And as a learner, we really can't do them both at the same time. You've probably found that when you think too much about what you're saying, about whether or not it's correct, you very often get it wrong. And you've definitely found that when you think too much about what you're saying, it doesn't come out smoothly. That's because, again, we can't both think about what we're saying and communicate it in a fluid way. The two just don't work together. So it's not a process of mastering a concept and then unveiling it with perfection in a conversation in practice. It's a lot more about trial and error with a lot of error. It's a lot like learning to drive. At the beginning, you've got to start with a little bit of theory, but pretty quickly you need to actually get into practice, the practice of turning the steering wheel, going into reverse, making a turn, because all that stuff just doesn't make very much sense just in a book. If all you did was read about it, you would never actually learn how to drive. But jumping in the driver's seat and actually making those movements for the first time, everything about driving is really overwhelming at first. But before too long, the things that you're doing become very, very automatic. You don't have to think about what you're doing. The same thing goes in Spanish. The concepts that we find difficult, before long, become automatic. Once we have a general idea of how they work and we have enough time for them to sink in and enough exposure to that concept in lots of different scenarios, once we have those things, then we have the necessary ingredients to be able to use that thing in an automatic way rather than in a way that relies on rote memorization. So it becomes a lot more about gut and intuition than logic. Our brains just need time for things to sink in. Otherwise, if you rely entirely on trying to master a concept before moving on, speaking Spanish is just going to be a painful process of constant second guessing, and that's not what you want. By the way, if you're finding this helpful and you want to become a more effective Spanish learner, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me know that you like the stuff that I make, and it helps you be more likely to see the stuff that I make. So what is a practical way that you can take a concept that's difficult for you and turn it into something that's automatic, that you don't need to think about? First step is to get the main idea of the thing that you're trying to learn. Say you're trying to learn the subjunctive in Spanish. Get the main idea. You can do this just by Googling subjunctive in Spanish. Read some articles, read lots of examples, listen to lots of examples, get the main idea of what it is. Don't try to get it perfect. Just get the main idea of the thing, then move on to the next step. Second step is to practice. Take what you learned from step one, from getting the main idea, and create some of your own example sentences using whatever the concept is, in this case, the subjunctive. So create your own example sentences using what you just learned. It's a really powerful way to consolidate the things that you've been learning so that it becomes more practical and personal and concrete to you. That way, the first time you go to use it in conversation with someone isn't the first time you've ever created a sentence with it. The third step, after you have gotten the main idea, done some practice with it, is just to move on. Just move on, because at this point, your brain has enough information for the time being. Your brain has enough information to start making connections, start noticing patterns, and start to help it sink in, again, a more automatic way. You can come back to it later, and when you do, it's going to make way more sense. Your brain is really good at recognizing patterns at a subconscious level. You don't have to spell everything out for yourself or try to memorize absolutely everything you come across. Instead, again, get the main idea, practice, move on, so that your brain has time for things to sink in and start to notice patterns. Soon, the choice between whether to use a subjunctive or not, or por versus para, ser versus estar, imperfect versus preterite, the choice between using those things will be pretty automatic. You'll just say whatever sounds right. And in 7 out of 10 cases, you will be right. That's because your brain will have thousands of data points to go off of, thousands of examples floating around in there that give you an instinct for what sounds right versus what doesn't sound right. And as you go, you'll fill in those gaps and get things more and more right. But at some point, you have to get out of the comfort zone of a book or a screen and actually start to use your Spanish, start to practice it. Because again, just like driving, if all you do is read about it and absorb it in a passive way, it's going to be really difficult to actually use it in practice. By the way, I'd be curious to know if you've had any experiences with pieces of grammar or any other concepts in Spanish that at first were really challenging, but over time became easy and natural to you. Things that were confusing at first, and now you don't have to think about. I'd be curious to hear your stories related to that. That is it. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you want to improve your Spanish with me, I will leave all the information that you need in the description box below. Thanks for watching.